We're talking all about grunge next on Retro Serial. Hey everyone, welcome to Retro Serial. I'm your host, Ian C. We're back. We've been gone for a little while because of, just some personal tragedies in my own life that I've had to endure, but we're back now. I kind of wanted to pause for a second and let everybody know who are my podcast listeners, because I kind of feel like if you're a podcast listener, you might be out of the loop a little bit as opposed to my YouTube listeners. My YouTube listeners are watching this. I'm sorry to bring this up again. I promise I'm not going to ruminate on this for very long, but I do feel like I owe a little bit of an explanation to those people who listen to me on audio only. Now, if you listen on audio only, as I have always said, there's always more content on YouTube where I've addressed some of this stuff. But recently, and again, if you're watching this on YouTube, you already know this. Sorry to repeat this. But recently, my wife did pass away from the 4-year battle that we had with cancer. And so I've taken some time off, but we're coming back now. So I just wanted everybody to know that. I wanted all my podcast listeners to know that, because again, there's more content on YouTube, and I think I addressed it on YouTube a lot more, but I didn't really address it on the podcast a whole lot. Although I think some people who listen to exclusively on podcast may have known. But if you're wondering where I've gone, that's kind of what happened, unfortunately. But with that said, I just want to invite you all to like, comment, subscribe, share on your favorite social media, write a review, all that stuff. On the program today, me and Thrash Pondo Pons talk about grunge, particularly grunge, especially grunge proper. We filter through all the stuff about the differences between alternative rock in general and grunge music specifically, and we kind of talk more focused in on that narrow topic. But I'm not going to talk for a long time about that, because he and I talk for a long time about grunge music. So whether you're a fan or not, or a casual listener to grunge music and grunge culture, well, I think you're going to like the show. So without further ado, here's the episode. Well, hey everyone, I'm back, as you know from the introduction, and in the studio with me, or via the internet, you see that I've got Thrash Pondo Pons. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing awesome. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, and so we're back. I don't know if this is a little premature or not, but quite honestly, it just helps me to do something. So it kind of keeps my mind off things. And I already explained all this in the introduction, so I'm not going to go ahead and explain it here. But one of the things that I've always wanted to do, especially and I know that I say this a lot when I talk about, making these videos, but one of the things I've always wanted to do is talk about grunge proper, like grunge specifically. And because it was such an influential movement during Gen Xers and during Generation X. And I think if you're on the front end of Gen X, it wasn't quite as impacting, although I think it was impacting with everybody. But if you were like me, somebody who was kind of more the middle, certainly I'm not at the tail end, but I'm more the middle. It impacted me quite a bit. I was a young adult when the grunge movement broke, and it had been building before, and we saw it in kind of small bands and stuff. But when it actually broke, when the world knew what grunge was because of Nirvana, and not that people didn't know what it was before, but when the world knew what it was because of Nirvana, I think I was maybe 18 or 19, somewhere around there. So I was a young adult, and it certainly did change the trajectory of my existence. So now I have to ask you, Thrash Pondo, what were you doing when the grunge movement hit? How did it impact you?
Well, I was actually perfectly placed. I graduated from college in 91.
Okay.
So I was that young adult just out of school, actually becoming an authentic adult
Right.
at this time frame. And not to mention, here we are, and we've talked about this before, about how the 80s was sort of the perfect springboard for everything. We had taken the rule book in the 80s and we had thrown it out the window. And it created this literally cultural vacuum, which needed to be filled. And the perfect filling for that was the whole grunge movement. Not just the movement, music, but the sort of cultural impacts it had as well.
Right.
And like I say, I would now, because of some unforeseen disasters in my personal life at that time, my life didn't take off like a shot like everyone's thought it was going to in the early 90s. Sadly, though, my story is more common than the alternative. I think there was a lot of misfiring going on in the early 90s, but I was perfectly placed to at least see the cultural shift.
Yeah. And were you excited about grunge? Did you like it, or did you initially couldn't stand it?
Well, I've always been a fan of innovation in music, whether or not they're innovations that I like. Just the fact that you're trying new things with any art form, you never want to stagnate. And this is from someone who still listens to 50s doo-wop. I've always been a huge fan of oldies. Still, my favorite type of music is oldies. But that being said, new trends are always something I'm going to listen to. For ages, I made sure I was home to listen to Alternative Nation on MTV because I wanted to hear the cutting edge sounds, which you could still get on MTV back then. I wanted to see where music was going. And again, its influence, it's weird how music influences TV and movies.
Oh, yeah.
Movies influence TV and music, and TV influences music and movies. It's all sort of a gestalt.
Right.
And I've always been fascinated by that. And again, few times were more obvious than that early 90s.
Right. You know, for me, it's kind of difficult to separate because I want to specifically talk about grunge and some of the grunge bands, but it's difficult to string out to a degree because grunge was part and even a very pronounced part of a whole underground movement that wasn't all necessarily grunge. You know, it was there was this alternative rock movement that grunge was a part of, this underground kind of sound that was emerging, but not every band that was underground was necessarily grunge. And for me, I was still very much into heavy metal when Nirvana broke, but I was also listening to bands that were considered to be like underground music. Like I was listening to the Violent Femmes quite a bit. And I was even listening to like older school rock. Like I used to listen to Pink Floyd, The Wall quite a bit. But what's interesting is even though like my favorite band of all time really is Nirvana. That's like my favorite band. And when they did come out and I did finally make the switch, I certainly dressed grunge, but I did not like grunge. Like the whole, like I wasn't a big grunge fan, believe it or not. I loved alternative rock. And alternative rock like really shifted me away from kind of heavy metal, especially at the time. You know, at the time I was one of those, and I've described this before, I was one of those kids who pretended I was always into alternative rock and never liked heavy metal, especially hair metal. But I did. And now I'm actually more into heavy metal than I've ever been for a long time, just because I like to listen to it when I work out. But I wasn't really a grunge proper fan, like grunge proper, you know, like when you think of the Seattle bands and the bands that Seattle sound influenced later. I wasn't into any of them. The only other band that really I was kind of into that was grunge was Alice in Chains.
Oh.
I wasn't a Pearl Jam fan. I I wasn't a Soundgarden fan. Now I have more respect for Soundgarden. I actually like Soundgarden, but they didn't appeal to me. Um, but I was into Nirvana top to bottom, though. I mean, seriously, top to bottom. But you have to admit, like, if you look at the four big bands, and there was a whole host of other bands that came out. Mudhoney, I was kind of into a little bit. I did kind of like Mudhoney, but like Mother Love Bone, Green River, those bands, they weren't like, I didn't hate them, but they weren't like my forte, like Nirvana was. But if you look at the big four that came out, like the big four that came out of the Seattle sound music, you look at Nirvana, you look at Alice in Chains, you look at Pearl Jam, although their singer was from San Diego, and you look at Soundgarden. Those are the big four that kind of came out.
STP.
STP is from Florida, aren't they?
No kidding. Oh, I always thought they were part of the Seattle scene.
No,
no kidding.
Yeah, they weren't.
Okay.
But we'll talk about that in a minute, because we'll talk about
Okay.
the influence and some of the crossover and stuff, and why there was a specific sound in Seattle. I want to get to that in a moment. But
Please.
if you look at those four bands, Nirvana was actually quite different.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
those, like, there's like Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains, and Soundgarden have more in common than I think than Nirvana does. Not Nirvana kind of sticks out a little bit because I think they had more of a pop sensibility, and they had more of a punk backbone to them. And I think that, and I used to argue for a long time whether or not Nirvana was really a grunge band. And I would say, well, they came from Seattle and they kind of dressed that way, and they had an unrefined sound that everybody kind of then had.
That sort of unpolished, sort of coffee shop sound. Yeah.
Right. But as far as their sound was concerned, you listen to a lot of the stuff that came out of Seattle at the time, and they didn't sound like anything. One of the bands that they did sound more like was Mudhoney. I don't know if were you a fan of Mudhoney?
I'm not familiar with Mudhoney. I'm racking my brains trying to think of a single by theirs. I don't recall them.
They've got tons of studio albums.
Well, I'm sure they did. I'm just not familiar with them.
Yeah.
I can't recall.
And but Nirvana sounded a little bit more like Mudhoney, quite honestly. But nothing. This is not a slam on Mudhoney. Mudhoney's a great band, but they sounded like a more poppy, kind of a better version of Mudhoney. But out of all the bands of Seattle that kind of came out, they sounded a little bit better. The only other band that was real kind of Seattle kind of that I really did enjoy was Alice in Chains. I liked Alice in Chains quite a bit. What about you? You have any thing? I've been blathering on here for a bit on it, but you have some stuff you want to add to the overall discussion on grunge?
My roommate was really into the sort of alternative scene at this time, so much so that I'm trying to make sure, like, in addition to liking the Seattle sound, he also liked Bare Naked Ladies, which are of course from Canada. Right. So he was sort of I guess you'd call it modern eclectic. I actually I did love Nirvana, and help me out here, and I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, because I have something I wanted to chat with you about as far as pop culture goes. But Paul Westerberg, was he the Seattle sound?
Was he the guy? Was he one of the guys that created Sub Pop, or no?
He is probably best known, and I'm gonna tip my hand. He's best known for being the original lead singer of the Replacements.
I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't really know too much about the Replacements, quite honestly.
Because now, as you know, as we were talking about earlier, the whole grunge scene wasn't just a music scene. It was also a fashion scene. It was a cultural scene. And of course, one of the first movies behind it was Singles. You ever see Singles?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Now, many people credit the movie Singles for being the inspiration of your favorite TV show of all time, Friends.
Yeah, I heard that. I did hear that it was kind of, did it come out before Friends?
90. It was started filming in 91. I believe it was released in 92. I want to say.
I think
And
Friends came out in
94.
Okay, 94.
I
Okay.
I stake my reputation on it,
Okay.
but yes. And of course, Paul Westerberg did the sound. He organized the soundtrack for Singles. Gave a couple of installments himself, and then went on to do the replacements, which of course did the theme song to it. Now, you really can't say Friends was grunge at all. They were way more polished and
Yeah.
yuppie, but it was that whole idea. It's like, this is something for our generation,
Yeah.
yours and mine.
Yeah.
Our parents' generation, they have their stuff for them. We're looking at us. We're looking at this young generation, and I was all over it. That being said, I would have trouble distinguishing it, as you mentioned about how a lot of what is considered grunge is actually more alternative. It just happened to come out at the same time.
Yeah, kind of grunge gets an alternative gets mixed in, labeled the same. Grunge proper is really a Seattle movement. And there was certain reasons culturally why Seattle was in, the Northeast, that whole Washington place, and bands
Northwest.
that were, yeah, Northwest. What did I say?
You said Northeast. That's
Northwest. Yeah, I don't know my directions. People are going to listen to me about culture.
At the risk of being pedantic.
Well, what was happening was, of course, there was this underground movement, and the underground movement really started with punk being driven underground. So punk was, this big movement that happened in the 70s and in the 80s, but it was a flash in the pan, just shoo. But people still really liked it, but it just didn't have the backing of all the the mega money of the record companies and stuff weren't backing it. So they had a real kind of do it yourself attitude. Well, it started, so people still listened to it, but it just wasn't on the radio. It wasn't, it was on obscure radio stations and stuff like that. So you had to kind of really search for it. Yeah, college radio. And they started to collect all these DIY bands. And so it started to create this sound. Well, this kind of California punk sound kind of was beginning to be popular, but these bands, they would never really make it up to Seattle, because they didn't really think it was anything special or whatever. But the few bands that did really left an impact. One of the bands that made it up there was Black Flag, would make it up to Seattle and stuff. And so they were kind of like this isolated island of music. And so they started to just be eclectic in the music they were developing. They would listen to bands all across the board. Some of them were heavy metal, but some of them were, real underground influenced. And then the other thing that happened is they live up there in the Northwest. And so the fashion was a lumberjack. That was really the fashion of them, was a lumberjack. I mean, you wore warm clothes. And then the other thing that happened is there was a big heroin movement as well. And one of the things about heroin is that your high is better. And I've never done heroin, but your high is better if you're not clean, if you're dirty.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. So that's why the people who do heroin don't wash as much, because I guess it has something to do with your pores, and it comes out in your pores. And so your high doesn't last as long. So if you're dirtier, you actually get a better high when you do heroin.
I thought just because most drug addicts I know let themselves go. So.
That's part. Hey, that's part of it. But there's also an added benefit. I didn't know from just letting yourself go. Yeah, and so it started to develop this sound and this look and this stuff that really was coming out of, which was really kind of coming out of Seattle. And it was a depressive place too, because you get to Seattle, up that direction, it rains a lot. It's, and they've done studies, on how sunlight affects you and stuff. And they've taken people who are depressed and made them get sun exposure, and they lose their depression. So, I mean, so you get this depressive kind of overcast, heroin addicted, isolated with the music. And it just kind of comes together in a sound that's shared by a lot of different people. Now, one of the bands, like you mentioned, that kind of had a similar sound but didn't come out of that was STP. There were these anomalies, there are these little bit of anomalies, but then at the same time it gets popular, and you have bands who copy that sound, or who are influenced, I should say. Some bands copy, some bands are they're just influenced by it, and there's a fine line there, which we all have an opinion about when someone crosses it. But then because you have bands like Days of the New, which I didn't enjoy at all. You have bands like Creed, which I just didn't enjoy at all. But anyway, I'm going on here. Was there something you wanted to add to that, or did I miss something? Did I miss something in your question? Or was there?
No. Oh no, we covered it. The social impact, and specifically why the actual grunge sound started in the Northwest.
Yeah.
We've covered that. So that's
yeah. The other thing that happened, and which made it popular too, we mustn't forget, was that we had the emergence of the record label Sub Pop. That was huge for making it go across the world. And they were, I forgot the name of the two, but they were basically two former musicians who said, we want to start producing Seattle bands, and we want them to do well. We don't want them to have jobs and have to do this at night. So they started doing the Singles Club. I don't know if did you ever look at that, or no? Were you ever part of that? I wasn't ever a part of it. I didn't know about it till later, but they would send singles of bands all across the U.S. These on tape, on little tapes.
I remember those single tapes. I don't remember them being played big at clubs.
Oh no, they weren't at clubs. They weren't. They just they'd get people to sign up, and then they would send them the tape.
Oh,
so it was like
yes. I remember those single cassettes.
Yeah, that was big. And so they would send their bands out. And one of the bands that was sent out was Nirvana. Nirvana would go, they would travel, and they would send them. And actually the Kurt Cobain was in the habit of destroying his instruments. And he said, because he's lazy and he doesn't want to do an encore. And and they actually allotted him $100 a day to buy a new guitar. So that was so that's why he would just go to pawn shops wherever he showed up, and just go to a pawn shop and buy just some crap guitar.
Because you just smash it that night anyway.
You're just going to smash it that night anyway. I think it was, I can't remember if it was $50 or $100, but Sub Pop was actually not quite happy with him, because Sub Pop was their manager too. They would set up all these shows around the country that they would go to. And, he would show up without an instrument. He'd be like, well, I just trashed it the night before. And they'd be like, okay, listen, you get, and I can't remember, it was $50 or $100, but you get $50 a day or $100 a day for a guitar, or not a day, but a show for a guitar. So they had to figure it out.
Too funny.
Yeah.
Too funny.
Well, were there other bands that you enjoyed from that era that were grunge, or how do you feel about these other grunge bands?
Well, like I say, I remember a lot from Alternative Nation. There's one I've been looking for years. She was a young woman. She had kind of almost like a hippie sound. And the only song, and I can't find it on YouTube, and when you can't find something on YouTube, it's obscure.
Oh, wow.
But I believe the song she did, her big hit was something called 1 Year Gone, or something along those lines. And I can't, if I knew her name, I'm trying to look her up. If I actually, my guess is it's sort of like Baba O'Reilly, where the fact that she says 1 year gone in the song doesn't mean it's the name of the song. That's the only line I can really remember. And she had some other hits too, but I can't find her. I remember Letters to Cleo. I remember that they were really big, although I really, in good conscience, can't call them grunge, but I thought they were great. Smashing Pumpkins is probably my favorite band from the area we're talking about here. There was just something about Smashing Pumpkins that they struck a chord with me.
Were they from Seattle, or were they from the Northeast?
I think they were actually from San Francisco or somewhere on the West Coast, but not Seattle.
Yeah. There was a big, and I don't know why. I mean, it wasn't for me. I didn't even know about some of these controversies, but I guess there was a big controversy between Nirvana and Smashing Pumpkins for some reason. So, I know. I mean, I know that Billy Corgan and Courtney Love had a thing at one time. So,
I didn't even know that part. I believe it, but I didn't know that part.
Billy Corgan was a huge fan of Nirvana.
But let's face facts. Kurt Cobain was notoriously difficult.
Yes,
he hated people who were his enemies. He hated people who were his friends. He was the typical angry young genius, and he was very self-destructive. But he was a genius, and he had trouble reconciling this genius, as so many of them do. And we've seen it with so many others. And sadly, a lot of them end up going the way Kurt Cobain did, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
But very sadly. But yes, he was notoriously just a difficult person across the board. A mumser, I think my mother would say.
Yeah, he was difficult to get. He was the typical loner too. You know what I mean? He was he didn't like crowds. He didn't like hanging out with people. He would nap all the time. So he would sleep all the time, which is a sign of depression. So, I mean, he wasn't an easy person to get along with at all from what I understand. And, but he was serious about, like, a lot of people don't think this about him because his music sounded so sloppy, especially that first album, Bleach. I mean, that just really sounds, but he was very specific about what he wanted his sound to be and how he wanted to look and how the band wanted to come across and stuff like that. He was very specific about that. So he was a very dedicated musician, but he wasn't, he was very difficult to get along with, apparently.
Well, it reminds me a little of Frank Zappa, who we lost actually around this time period. A lot of people thought he just went out there and free formed and made noise, and it was just sort of just a free for all. No. He was very, very, very specific about what he wanted. You could not be in his band if you had not been trained in classical music.
Oh wow!
And even where he's just smashing a car while the band is playing in the background, he's smashing that car in time with the music, or at least the way he wants it in time with the music. Talk about your frustrated genius type. Zappa was just a little more approachable. Frustrated genius, never heard a bad thing about him except from Tipper Gore. And that's a whole other kettle of worms.
A couple of things I wanted to bring up here is the grunge movement, I think, was really responsible for the anti-heavy metal movement. I don't think that I actually don't think that there would have been such an amount of antithesis toward hair metal if it wasn't for grunge. I think that they would have, just because we've seen other music kind of grow up beside other music. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
I mean, you think of new wave, for example.
I was gonna say new wave, punk, heavy metal. They all kind of emerged together.
It wasn't as though classic rock died when new wave hit. You know what I mean? It wasn't.
I know exactly what you mean.
That didn't happen. And even though a new waver and kind of maybe a classic rock person, a old school Kiss rock person, they would have been very different. There wasn't the animosity that existed. But I think and I honestly don't think there would have been the animosity between like hair metal and and alternative rock if it wasn't for grunge, and I think specifically if it wasn't for Nirvana. um Kurt was very bullied as a kid, and he was very bullied by those people.
The
He had,
shop kids.
yeah, the Mr. Mustache, the kind of, doing the chew and listening to the classic rock and having, either the mullet or the Camaro kind of stuff. And so that
With the
came out.
jean suits and the Iron Maiden t-shirts and the
Right.
wallet on a belt, and yeah.
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 And
So
so
yeah, I know
that
the type. I remember them vividly.
I remember him too. That
Uh,
came out with that his animosity toward them came out when he got popular, because that was
uh-huh.
part of his growing up. That was part of his ethos. Now he's big and popular, and I think that it just got picked up on by people. It just got picked up on. Oh no! Now we're not only do we listen to this new music, we hate this music. We can't stand you guys are a bunch of idiots and you have no musical talent at all. And it wasn't every band, but I mean, I think that the bands that really kind of suffered the most were those late 80s, early 90s heavy metal bands, when I mean it was just kind of like big hair, lipstick, and stuff like that. Poison, I think
Rat.
there's an animosity between, yeah,
Yeah.
Motley Crue, Poison,
Yeah.
Rat, the Cinderella.
Warrant.
Yeah.
Who?
Oh, Warrant. Yes.
Yeah. Which I still is opinion. I've covered this on at least 3 other posts, but I have to bring it up now. My greatest limitation about Warrant is the only song they will ever be remembered for is Cherry Pie. And he did that basically with a gun to his head. The studio said, we want something snappy. We want something that they're going to play at college fraternity parties. We want something, I don't want to say banal, but it's all I can think of. We want something very, he wanted to make really important music. He wanted to do stuff like Uncle Tom's Cabin,
Yeah.
which is basically a power ballad. But they
Mhm.
go, no, do this song. And he goes, fine, he did it. It made him a boatload of money. He made more money on that song than probably all those other things combined. But it was his greatest limitation. I think he may have done better if he had joined the grunge movement. I don't know. He might still be alive.
Maybe.
Although,
Well, no, well, he didn't kill himself though. I think
no, but he died of
didn't he die of
harsh living
complications
from
from
cirrhosis of the liver.
oh, did he?
Because he
Okay.
was a terrible alcoholic who did a lot of other things that you're not supposed to do when you drink alcohol.
I
Is the
see.
short answer. So,
I
but
got
then
it.
again, so did a lot of grunge performers. So,
Yeah, it's amazing that they're all dead, except for Eddie Vedder. Well, not all of them, but the popular 4 are gone. There were a couple other bands that kind of grew up during that kind of got a little bit popular that were actually technically grunge. I would consider them grunge proper. Tad would have been one. I don't know if you ever listened to any Tad. And
not
then the
familiar.
Screaming Trees kind of
I don't know the Screaming Trees either.
yeah, there's a reason you don't hear of these bands, though. Quite honestly,
They don't play them on the radio.
they weren't that good.
Well, that's all right.
I'm
That's
sorry. Look. If there's a Screaming Trees person, I know that you're probably great and you're a better musician than I am, but they didn't hold a candle to bands like Nirvana and Pearl Jam, and they weren't as radio friendly. They may have been better musicians. Who knows? I mean, it's music. It's a matter of taste. But I mean, you listen to Alice in Chains, and you're going, "Whoa, man, this is an awesome band." Even people who listen to Pearl Jam, yeah, I mean, even though I'm not a Pearl Jam fan, it's just they've got something there. You know what I mean? You pull up Screaming Trees, and it's underwhelming. I mean, it really is. Their songs they're just not as good as songs.
good.
I'm sorry. They're just not as good. And they got their fair shot. Because like in the punk rock movement, when something explodes and the all the record companies come and look there and they sign people and they put them out and they do a video and it just it just didn't go as good. Well, again, probably one of the only bands that were more underground bands there that I actually liked was Mudhoney. I think Mudhoney had a pretty cool sound. They had a pretty good pop sensibility. They were one of those bands that I think should have been a little bit more popular. But there was other bands too that came out of that Seattle sound that just didn't make it as much. L7 was one. I don't know if you were familiar with L7.
No, but I love the name. It's
Yeah.
the old beat poet for Square. The L7.
That's a what? What is it?
Oh, L7 was beat poetry. The beatniks. That
Oh,
was slang for a square.
it's
An
probably.
L7.
Oh, I didn't know that. It's probably
Uh,
where they
and a
came
square
from.
being someone who doesn't roll. He's a Herbert.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Well,
I
L7
love the name.
together kind of makes a little bit of a square, kind of. But 7 Year Bitch. I don't know if you ever heard of them or not.
No.
Yeah, what were some of the other ones? I can't remember some of the other ones that came out during that time.
Toad the Wet Sprocket.
Yeah, Toad the Wet Sprocket had a little bit of a grunge sound to them. They were a little bit kind of grungy. I
Do
don't
you know where
know.
they got their name?
No, I have no idea.
There was an old Monty Python. I don't know if you know this. The mega comic group from England. They every now and then they would put out these comedy books. Some of them had printed adaptations of their sketches. Some of them had like just funny stories. But there was one segment. It had a book of lists, and one of these lists was the 10 dumbest names for a music band. And the number one dumbest name for a music band was Toad the Wet Sprocket. And it was just some made up group. It didn't exist. But one of them, I guess, saw it in the book when he was a kid. And when he was joining a band and they were spitballing ideas, he goes, "How about this from Monty Python?" And people said, "You know what? That's cool. That's slick. No one's going to get it. We'll have to explain it.
Yeah.
We'll go with that."
I wasn't a huge fan of theirs, but I do remember listening to an album and thinking it was pretty good. Were you a fan or no?
Like I said, I was an eclectic at this time. I listened to them, but I was listening to anything MTV was playing on Alternative
Hmm.
Nation at this time.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to remember, there was, in addition to Alternative Nation, there was another show MTV had around the same time.
120 minutes.
Thank you. It was killing me.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
120 minutes was awesome. Alternative Nation, 120 minutes. They were really good. And I personally speaking, I was primed to jump on board with it. Spoke to me in a way that heavy metal didn't. I honestly, when I look back, I felt more like a phony listening to heavy metal, and I
Oh,
felt like,
really?
yeah, because I mean, heavy metal was all about like, to me, it was very showmany. It was all, I mean, it was very excessive. It was very, macho, and I was none of those things. And I was trying to pretend to be those things though. You know what I mean? So like it was like I was a phony when I was listening to heavy metal. I wanted to be the coolest kid and stuff like that. And one of the things that kind of freed me up with alternative rock, and then plus just not just alternative rock, but with grunge proper, or even Nirvana, was like, okay, it's okay to not be cool. It's actually cool to not be cool.
Be cool.
Yeah, it became cool to not be cool. And so like that was kind of me. I kind of accepted, okay, you're kind of a loser. You don't have as many friends as you think you should, and you don't have a girlfriend and all this stuff. So I was like, I felt at home with it. It really spoke to me. And and it also spoke to me like with kind of the more depressive sound too, because that's kind of like who I was bubbling underneath rather than who I was on the surface. Who I was on the surface was, hey, let's do it. I'm cool. And I'm like, I'm not cool, man. And it was okay to not be cool. So I appreciated that realism in it. um the other thing I think we need to mention is the battle that happened between Kurt Cobain and Eddie Vedder. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, or
we spoke of it once ages ago, I think when we had Redbeard on, and
yeah.
I'm racking my brain. So why don't you take this one, because I'm a little sketchy.
Well, of course, part of the Seattle sound and part of that Seattle movement was the idea that they wanted this genuineness and not showmanship in their music, and the band Pearl Jam used to be the band called Mother Love Bone. I don't know if you knew that or not, but they were Mother Love Bone, and they had a singer, and he was from Seattle, and but he OD'd on heroin and died. And you can listen to their album still. I think they only had one album, and it's free on YouTube to listen to. And it's not bad. I mean, it's different, it's kind of a different sound. It's got a little bit more heavy metal to it. The singer was kind of an eccentric person. He still wore all the makeup and stuff, but they had more of a classic rock sound. And he would wear like all the makeup and get dressed up for like a 3-person show. He was just an eccentric individual, and he died. And at the same time, that more high range, that high ranged kind of heavy metal a voice started to become less popular, or I should say a baritone voice started to become more popular at the same time. And I remember, because kind of at the same time, there were a few still heavy metal bands that were coming out and trying this. So for example, do you ever listen to a heavy metal band called Atomic Playboys?
No.
So it was Steve Steven from Billy Idol.
Really?
And he had a band called Atomic Playboys, and it was more of a heavy metal band, but the singer kind of had that lower baritone register. And the other band that kind of came out during that was Lynch Mob, George Lynch, from Dokken. Yeah, and he came out with his own band called Lynch Mob, and the singer for Lynch Mob kind of had that lower sound. So that was kind of becoming popular right around 1990, 91. And then you had the singer for Mother Love Bone die, and they were traveling. They were going to quit. Mother Love Bone was going to quit, but they reassembled into Pearl Jam and hired Eddie Vedder from San Diego. And Kurt just lost his mind over that. He was like, "How dare you go and just kind of capitalize on what we're doing." He really felt as though they sold out, as that was his big deal, as they were sold out. But I mean, I think, again, Kurt Cobain, hard to get along with, right? Difficult person to get along with. He felt as though Eddie Vedder was a foreigner almost in the movement, a phony, and he was not happy with the rest of the band, because they were from Seattle, but they were just kind of doing what was popular at the time, getting somebody. That's kind of how he felt about it. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but that is certainly how he felt about it. And he made no bones about it either. He made no bones. He used to complain about them and everything. But near the end, they did reconcile. He did say that Eddie Vedder was a good guy. So, and that he wasn't, even though he wasn't a phony, he basically said that he basically kind of embraced him and said, "Okay, I know you're not from Seattle, but you sound genuine. You don't sound like somebody." And I did this myself with Alanis Morissette. I don't know if
with Alanis Morissette.
I
Really?
did. I thought she was I wouldn't listen to her. I hated her. When her first album, Jagged Little Pill, came out, I loved it. But I felt as though she was a phony on the whole, not on grunge, but on the whole alternative rock.
Really?
Because she was in a pop band before,
Well, yeah.
and all this stuff, and I really misjudged her I really misjudged her, because I thought, oh well, and I didn't feel like her songs were sincere. I really felt like she was just riding the wave of alternative rock. And it wasn't until like actually just this year, because a documentary came out called Jagged, and she got to tell her story, and lo and behold, her story was somewhat similar to mine. She was into that stuff, just like I was into hair metal, but then she found it, and she found like a real connection to it, and she was still struggling with things, and it all came out in Jagged Little Pill. And
is it true that Do You Want to Know was actually based on the breakup she had with Uncle Jesse from Full House? Is that true?
Not Uncle Jesse, Dave Coulier.
Which one is Dave Coulier?
He's not Uncle Jesse. He's the other uncle.
The other uncle, the funny one, the one who does the voices.
Yes, the guy. No, they did go out, but whether or not that was about her, it's more of an eclectic. It's more of kind of an eclectic thing that would definitely include him. But was it about him specifically? We don't know, and she won't say.
Gotcha. And yes, I Stamos is Uncle Jesse.
Right.
I had my uncles mixed up, but at the time I remember that was a huge rumor that it was all about him.
Right. And yeah. It might be, and I have my suspicions that it was. I can't remember what she said about it, but as I recall, and I watched that Jagged show. It's really good. And it talks about their, like their affinity with Foo Fighters, and how Taylor Hawking, who just recently died, left.
That's right. Yes.
Alanis Morissette and went over to the Foo Fighters. So, but it was kind of a clean break. I mean, they had just finished touring, and he was basically going to be unemployed. And then he and the Foo Fighters needed a drummer. And so they called him, and he basically said, well, I won't be on the next tour, so I'm going to be on this one. So it was clean to a degree, as clean as those things can go.
Yeah.
But yeah, Jagged. I mean, it's on HBO.
I got HBO Max. Maybe I might have it. I'll check it out.
Watch it. It's good.
I will.
It's really good.
I did like the fact that she finally did admit that when she wrote the song, Isn't It Ironic? She didn't fully understand what the word irony meant, which is why in an entire song about irony, there's not an actual version of irony in the song. She always interpreted it more as bad luck.
Yeah.
Because when bad things happen, people say, oh, kind of ironic, isn't it? So she just thought ironic meant bad luck.
Yeah, I didn't know what that really meant either. Like I could have gone my whole life. It wasn't that. Then when you mentioned it, it was just like, oh yeah, that's right. That really is an irony. That really is just bad luck.
Yeah, for it to be ironic, there has to be like some like connection. Like for example, you're dying of thirst in a desert, and it starts raining, and you drown in a flash flood. That would be ironic. But just dying in the desert itself isn't ironic.
Right.
It has to be the manner in which you die. Ironically.
Well, were there any bands that you kind of like? How did you feel about bands like Creed and Silverchair and bands like that kind of seemed to? Bush was another one that kind of took people thought they were, just kind of copycatting these the popular bands. Did you like those bands, or did you? I
like Bush a lot. I'll be honest with you. I don't know if that makes me a fanboy or not, but I like Bush a lot. Creed, I could take or leave. I'm not actually familiar with the last one, the third one you mentioned, but I loved Bush. I would say particularly Everything Zen.
Yeah.
Is that the name of that album?
Yeah.
particularly that one. I found that if you being a copycat isn't a big sin as long as there's a certain level of sincerity behind it. You know,
Hmm.
it's like, yes, I'm copying music, but I'm copying it with heart. Hootie and the Blowfish. Early on, they were well. I believe they actually were hit with a plagiarism lawsuit from Bob Dylan at one point.
Oh,
Are you familiar
really?
with this? I
No.
heard they were actually hit with for copyright infringement because
Huh.
they said what we're doing it as homage. He said it was plagiarism. How true that is, I don't know, but they were borrowing very, very heavily from Bob Dylan in the beginning. But that doesn't mean they weren't sincere. I
Hmm.
think Darius Rucker really loved the music and was trying to create something along those lines. The Beatles, their biggest album is still Sergeant Pepper,
Uh-huh.
and Sergeant Pepper is them trying to do the Beach Boys. As long as it's not just well, not to mention, on the other hand, I also like cover bands. So if you can steal somebody's stuff directly and enjoy it, but as far as borrowing from it, as long as you put on your own spin and it's done with sincerity and not just as a cash grab, I don't have a problem with it. If that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I used to really not care for bands that copied a little too much. They weren't my favorites. They weren't my favorite kind of thing. I thought that but you know, a lot of my own original music that I've never released, never really recorded. I've written a bunch of stuff, recorded some of it's on tape somewhere, was very derivative of Nirvana. So I can't, I mean, whenever you're pointing a finger, you got three pointing back at
Yeah, I get you.
yourself. But I was not happy with bands, especially when the what was called the Jarl. You know what the Jarl is, right? That's that low,
Gotcha.
that,
Now I'm with you.
that Soundgarden had, and Soundgarden was a little bit higher though, but that same kind of sound, but then everybody started doing it. You know what I mean? I kind of was just like, yeah, that's not really your voice though. That's not really, like, if you're just singing, that's not how you would sound. Where Eddie Vedder, that's kind of how he sounds when he
Gotcha.
sings.
Really?
That's
That's
Yeah,
his register?
uh, I think so. I think when he sings, I mean, I don't see him as having imitated anybody. You know what I mean?
I'm with you. I'm with you.
I don't see um it might be stylized, but I don't see him as imitating anybody. Same with Alice in Chains. Alice in Chains, by the way, I just have to say, Alice in Chains, I love Alice in Chains. They were the only like band that I would say considered grunge proper, no doubt about it, 100% grunge band. Love Alice in Chains. Dirt was all one of my all-time favorite albums of all time. But that sound, he has that lower register too, that kind of Jarl, what they call it. But then suddenly everybody started imitating the Jarl, Days of the New. I didn't like Days of the New. People brought in Days of the New, started playing it. I'm like, I don't like this band. They don't, first of all, their songs really aren't that good. And they sound like they're trying to copy, they sound like they're trying to copy Eddie Vedder too much. Same with Silverchair. Although they were young kids, Silverchair, I think they were like 16 or something like that. I know you know who Silverchair is.
I'm
They
sure if I heard them, I'd know them.
Yeah, they were a band especially their later stuff actually was really good because but they were a band out of Australia, and the singer he looks a lot like Kurt Cobain.
Really?
Yeah, but he sounds like Eddie Vedder. He looks like Kurt Cobain but sounds like Eddie Vedder. Uh yeah, I wasn't happy with those bands. Puddle of Mud. Not did you hear Puddle of Mud or no? Is this these bands you've not heard of either?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with Puddle of Mud. I'm
Yeah,
afraid.
but these were all like grunge copycats almost. I have to admit though, I did like Bush. I thought Bush was a great band.
I
You know,
really did too.
I thought they were good. He does a great he does a great cover of changes. by Stevie
By
Nicks.
David Bowie?
No.
Oh, Stevie Nicks.
Is that what it's called? No changes.
I'm trying to think of the name. When you said changes, I have the David Bowie song stuck in my head. Changes.
Yeah.
I know the song you're talking about, but I can't think of it because I have the other one stuck in my head. But yeah,
Right.
yes,
He has a really good cover of that. I think he has a really good voice. Smashing Pumpkins did a cover of that song too.
Really?
Yeah, that Stevie Nicks song. I've been afraid of changes. I'm not doing it justice right now. Please don't consider this.
Stevie Nicks is a tough person to sing in her register.
Yeah.
You know.
Since I can't remember. Anyway, I'm not going to try to sing right now. I'm not warmed up or anything. And then people are going to listen. That's what you sound like. No, that's not what I sound like. So,
well, it is what I sound like. I'm afraid I have a voice that's blood curdling. So
I've been afraid of changes since I.
Oh yes. Oh, yeah, it's a duet she does with Tom Petty.
No, that's
what am I thinking
one.
of?
Stop dragging my heart around.
But I do know the song you're talking about. I do know the song you're talking about, but
I've been afraid of changes
since I something my life with you.
Yeah.
And I've been something else for something else too.
Yeah.
And I do know the song, but
anyway, yeah.
Having butchered Stevie Nicks.
Having butchered that, not at my best, please don't take that as an example of what I actually sound like, what I sing, because it isn't. Yeah, the Bush does a cover of that. It's really good. It's actually really good. So there were a few bands out there that I liked. And there's one band that I think I don't care for the band a whole lot. They're not like my favorite band, but they just got mutilated in the press, and I think just unjustly, is Nickelback.
Oh, I know. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I don't know why people hate them so much. I mean, they're not my go-to band. I have to admit, they're not like something I'd put on and listen to, but I don't understand why people don't like them. Like the animosity that they have toward that band is just crazy. So.
Yeah. It just, there's a certain hostility there, and I don't know why. Perhaps it's something that I missed or something, but yes.
I guess, I don't know. I think that when you get to a band like Nickelback, I think I think people thought that it was a little bit of a copycat, but I don't think so. I think when you get that far out from grunge, and you're getting in the late 90s, mid to late 90s now, that you are dealing with influence, not copycat. And I would say, yeah, they were heavily influenced, but I didn't see them as a copycat band at all.
Was it because maybe they were sort of influenced by country as well? So it's sort of a grungeability sound, and maybe people didn't like them reconciling the two. You're either one or the other. You can't have both.
I have no idea. I mean, I would have to sit down and talk with somebody who hates them.
I mean, Lux Interior merged punk rock and country music. He called what he was doing punkabilly.
Yeah,
and I if you can reconcile those two, I don't see why you couldn't do grunge and country. But again, the listeners of both sounds can be judgmental, I think is a nice way of putting it. So maybe he ended up losing both audiences, and that's I'm just spitballing here.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Crazy.
Well, I don't think we can talk about grunge without talking about the haters of grunge. Because there were people like Dave, our friend Dave. He just does not like Nirvana at all. And I actually thought about having him on, but I kind of did this a little bit more last minute. I was actually going to have Samurai on, and we were going to talk about sword and sorcery, but we're going to be doing that on the 7th. By the way, we'll do that on the 7th and in the evening.
That's where we left off. I had forgotten about that because I don't know. I did the Action Elite Excalibur, and I thought the two would go great together.
That's cool. That's really cool. But the deal, I mean, there are some people who absolutely hated Nirvana. And
Mhm.
I don't personally, I don't understand. Like, I don't get it. I would love to hear why. Like, was it what they did to previous music? I mean, was it their sound? I mean, it's almost like when somebody doesn't like a food that you really like. You're like, I don't understand what you're tasting. And sometimes you get it. Sometimes, like, like you'll like a food that is a little weird. But it's like when somebody doesn't like pizza. Yeah, I mean, I know that you've met some people who don't like pizza, and it's just weird. It's like everybody likes pizza.
Pizza.
What is it you don't like? What are you tasting? I'm not, I want to know. So, but some people did not like Nirvana, especially Nirvana.
Well,
Um,
I think it gets back to what we were talking about how Cobain was not an easy person to like, or more
mhm,
importantly, an easy person to dislike. I think a lot of people couldn't separate the two. Like,
yeah.
take for example, my wife is not a huge fan of the Beatles. Why? Because she can't stand John Lennon for any number of reasons I won't get into right now. I don't want to muddle the mix. She can't stand John Lennon, and her and
Favorite
I have
Beatle.
we have talked about this on several occasions.
Right.
We could actually do a whole podcast on that, to be honest with you. And so she's not a huge Beatles fan because every time she thinks of the Beatles, she thinks about John Lennon.
Mm,
And I think a lot of people could not separate Kurt Cobain from Nirvana. And if you don't like Kurt Cobain, and let's face facts, there's several valid reasons why people could not like Kurt Cobain. If you don't like Kurt Cobain and can't separate him from the band, that would be the number one thing. It's not if they listen to the music microcosmic,
mhm.
like if you didn't tell them it was Nirvana, they might like the music. But as soon as they know it's Kurt Cobain's music, they're going to automatically dislike it because they can't separate themselves from the person. How many
Right.
people can't watch Woody Allen movies these days, even once he's not in,
Mm,
and so on and so forth?
yeah.
And I think we're seeing that more and more these days as people become, I don't want to say polarized, but as more and more as the artists themselves, as more and more come out about them that make the artist more intolerable,
Yeah.
it's becoming increasingly easy to discredit their body of work, even though I feel it's important to try to separate the two.
Mm, mm,
But a lot of
yeah.
people can't.
Yeah.
And let's just say that's probably a big part of the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and finally, let's talk about the death of grunge. Let's talk about it was now alternative rock's still around.
Oh, yeah.
Alternative rock as a whole is still underground music that basically turned into alternative rock, which did become popular, is still around. But grunge proper is dead. I mean, it is. I mean, it's there. I mean, there are still bands that are technically grunge that are still doing their thing. Mudhoney being one of them. But as Melvins too, I forgot to mention the Melvins. Melvins are straight up awesome band. But as far as grunge goes, um, it's gone. I mean,
Mhm.
you still have the big names kind of moving on. I mean, the only one really that's left is Pearl Jam. I mean,
Mhm.
that's it. I mean, I guess Alice in Chains, they did another album with somebody else, with another singer, but
Yes, they did, but
yeah. But I mean, and they did have everybody else, but I mean, gosh, good night. You just can't replace Lane Staley. I mean, he is even though like he was only one of the writers, and the guitarist really was a driving force in it. Lane Staley had such a sound to him that without him, it's just hard to listen to. It's hard to really think of it as the same band. It's not like you can replace it. You just can't.
yeah.
And I think really people debate on when grunge died. Some people say when Kurt Cobain killed himself, and others say when Soundgarden broke up. And those are two dates, 94 and 96. Um,
So
uh,
call it mid 90s.
yeah, mid 90s, but it's gone. I mean, it is gone. And the bands that are that, are still grunge, that are still doing their thing. They're just not that popular. People just don't they just don't listen to them. There are still grunge bands that are putting out albums.
Oh, I
Um,
believe it. I'm sure.
yeah.
But well, it's weird because how should I put this? I think it seems that the bands that have the biggest influence are oftentimes the biggest flash in the pan. Have you ever noticed that?
Yeah.
And I think that because it's not just the sound, but it's everything around them. I hesitate to use the word gimmick, but just well, let's take for example. I was watching Return of the Living Dead the other night. Again, because I was going to incorporate into a show I was doing, and one of the punk rockers who's decked out with all the pins and the chains, and he's got the earring down to the nose ring with a chain going down to the weird hair, and he goes, "What, you think this is a joke? It's a way of life." And I go, "It is for about 18 months." And then next thing you know, he'll be wearing like an Oxford shirt and having a crew cut. These social reforms tend not to last very long, and I think grunge, with the coffee house sound and the dim lights and the sort of like dingy worn flannel shirts. I think it was sort of a nice shtick, but when the shtick gets old, the whole ball of wax gets old.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think they painted themselves into a corner. I mean,
Right.
they couldn't go forward with what they were doing, and what they were doing got stale,
Uh-huh.
or would have gotten stale.
Right. Well,
No
and it
matter how
only
long.
appeals to, you get new kids growing up and listening to their own music. And, some things appeal to them still, some things don't. And it just ends. One of the things though that I do like is the lasting power of the band Nirvana, especially. I still see teenagers wearing Nirvana shirts.
Yep.
I'm like, this is amazing. I would never thought about this. Every once in a while, you'll see somebody wear, somebody out of a generation wear an Elvis shirt or a Beatles shirt, but that's it. Elvis, and how many people do you know still wear, who are teenagers, who are teenagers, say, wear a Motley Crue shirt or something like that. If you see somebody in a Motley Crue shirt, it's generally somebody older and it's nostalgic.
But I think again it has to do with the tragic demise. If you remember one of the some of the posts I do from my garage, I have that massive tapestry of Jim Morrison.
Oh,
which
yeah.
which I've had in my room since I was 16 years old.
Well, he's another great one.
But it's also because he died tragically. Just like Hendrix, just like Jeff Buckley. Just when an artist dies tragically, he becomes immortal.
I get it. I get that. But I think it just, if I could just kindly disagree with you just a tad.
It's a free country.
Yeah. I do see that. I do see that in some ways it makes them a martyr. It solidifies them. But good night. Nirvana was everywhere way before they died. And I you know what I mean? Way before he died.
No. They brought the talent. It was a two-edged sword. They certainly brought the talent. They certainly were a viable mega sound before the tragic end.
Yeah.
But I think the tragic end is what made them so endearing.
So I guess, so let me ask you this hypothetical question. I already have an answer to it myself in my own mind. So if Kurt Cobain had not killed himself, would children today still be wearing the Nirvana shirt? I would say yes.
I'd say yes too. I would say yes.
That's what I think, that it was so impacting, especially Nevermind. Nevermind. You listen to Nevermind and it sounds like it could have came out yesterday.
Yeah.
I know that's not everybody's favorite who are real, hardcore Nirvana fans. They like other ones. But that it still has such a relevant sound to it that I think people really enjoy it. And you can even watch whole YouTube videos I don't. Have you ever watched those YouTube videos where it's like first time listening to Nirvana?
Yes, I do. I love those.
And
I do. I
kids
love
listening
those.
to this or whatever. It's kind of those are kind of funny. So I guess that's
Lee
kind of where.
Mateus does stuff like that, actually.
Yeah, he does. Yeah,
Yeah,
Lee
he's
does.
taking music that he's never really been into and going back and listening to it. I haven't seen too much of the last couple of weeks, but he has been doing stuff like that.
That's cool.
He has such appreciation for music that
Yeah,
it's really cool when he does it because it's like he brings the recognition to a different level.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There's a few bands that I have the kind of the I would say the legacy of a that, and I know that I've touted this. I don't know how many people even listen to me or whatever, but honestly, the band Brand New is amazing. If you've not
Brand
listened to
new.
them, you really are doing yourself a disservice. Especially the God and Devil are raging inside me. The
Mhm.
first 5 songs off of that are gold. Science fiction. It's I know I've brought this up before, and I don't know how many people actually listen, but they are amazing. They are amazing, and they have that same kind of they bring up the same kind of emotions without being copycats of Nirvana. They really are the
Hmm.
band that has caught my attention more than anybody else since Nirvana is that band. But you got to listen to him, man. If you haven't listened
I
to him,
will.
you need to seriously,
Mhm.
seriously. Um,
I will.
let's close it out.
Oh, cool.
Let's hear what you're doing over on your station. You're doing a lot of live videos right now.
I have been doing a lot of live videos. In fact, at leisure, I would like to talk to you about StreamYard, by the way, because I think I'm going to need to go from YouTube to StreamYard. You mentioned that to me a while ago, and I think I could present a much better product if I do that. But I have been doing a lot of live chats, mostly on vintage sci-fi and horror. A good friend of channel of mine, Retro Nerd Girl, gave me some pointers. She has like 4,000 viewers, and she said while she enjoys and while so many people also enjoy the top 10 dad jokes,
Right.
and some of the other stuff, she goes, you might want to stick to your brand. And because my brand was sci-fi horror, I should stick to
Yeah.
that. So I'm doing more and more with that. My creepy classics, I think, falls under that category. That's where I take an old vintage song from back in the day, one that sounds like it's this really fun, cute, snappy, poppy song. And when you listen to the words, it's actually very creepy. And
Yeah.
there's more
Yeah.
of
That
those
was
than you'd
fun.
think.
That was fun. Yeah.
So in addition to my live stuff and my vintage sci-fi horror, I got a lot going on. I'm up to 150 and change viewer wise. I have 150 plus subscribers.
Well, who's this? Who's Retro Nerd Girl?
Retro Nerd Girl, you gotta check her out. Nerd Girl has a channel right on YouTube, and she takes old classic science fiction film and does not just reviews of them, but basically like a retrospective where she covers them in detail as far as mechanically how they stand up, as well um, as far as how good the story is and how good the acting is. So she takes it from all angles, and she has some amazing posts out there. She did one on wizards. Remember we talked about wizards with our
Yeah.
post-apocalyptic,
Well,
and
we got to get her on the show.
oh, I would love to. She was just on my live chat last night. Actually, I
Oh,
would
was
love to
she?
get Retro Nerd Girl on.
Well, I gotta reach out to her.
Please do, please do.
So you've got a connection with her.
I sure do.
Well, let's get her. Tell her.
I will do my best. I will do my best. I've
We'll reach out to her. I'll reach out to her
again.
too.
You got it.
Okay,
Excellent.
because
Okay.
we need some more females on the show too. And, we had the Glitter Boom Girls, and they kind of were like a whirlwind of greatness that just kind of blew through our lives, and then now they're gone. I feel, gosh, I'm still friends with Robbie. Well, I'm friends with both of them, but I mean, I more contact with Robbie than I think
Amy.
Amy. I think Amy is in school right now, so I think she's working towards something, and I think they kind of just chilled out on their channel. But anyway, and then we had the Metal Tavern, where we had the husband and wife team there, and she was on. But they are kind of taking a sabbatical from YouTube right now. But I'd love to have her on, man. I'd love to have her on. That'd be great. I reached out to Morgan Richter, who did when Gen X rolled the multiplex, and she just said she doesn't like doing stuff like that. She feels uncomfortable. So I was like, all right, no big deal. I get it. So let's get this retro nerd girl on. I would love to have her on. And then, well, for me right now, I mean, I'm just kind of coming back. This Monday, I'm going to be filming 5 things you didn't know about Married with Children. And we won't be doing the Monday live stream because it's the 4th of July. So we're not going to be talking about this. I don't know. I might do it Tuesday. Are you available Tuesday, or do you have to work Tuesday?
I have to work Tuesday, I'm afraid.
All right. Well, I still might do it Tuesday if you won't be terribly offended. So,
I'll survive. I'll pick up the shattered pieces and carry on.
All right. Yeah. And then the other thing is we're going to have Samurai on the show on Thursday night. And I might just make it a live stream.
That'd be great.
So you can interact with people and stuff like that, and still just rip the audio and do it a live stream / podcast, rather than doing a podcast and trying to get him back on the live stream. He's got a lot of his own live streams he does. I didn't last time I had him on, and I didn't do the live stream with him, and it wasn't because I didn't want him. It's because he was doing his own live stream on Mondays, and so I didn't want to have him, on my show while he could have been on his own, while doing his own show. I didn't want to take that from him. So he probably would have said yes to be nice, because he's such a good guy.
Awesome guy.
Yeah. But when he's at the level where he actually gets funds from his live stream. So I didn't want to have him on my show where he's not getting the money. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because he probably would have said yes, but he probably would have, lost a good couple $100, just coming over. So I didn't want to do that to him. So I might just do, and he wants to do it Thursday evening too. It's going to be Thursday at 7 my time, which will be 9
8 o'clock my time.
No, 9 your time.
No. If it's 7. Oh, yes, you're right. Sorry.
That's all right. And so so we're talking about Sword and Sorcery. And again, I might just open it up to just do a live chat with him on it, rather than, whatever. But all right, man. Well, thank you everyone for watching this episode. This is the first episode back of Retro Serial that we haven't done for a while, and planning on moving forward with everything. Please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the comment button, hit the button, share it on your favorite social media. If you're interested in helping us out, you're welcome to join our Patreon, and I will have the link to my channel if you're listening to this on podcast, and Thrash Pondo's channel as well. And subscribe to both. We love subscribers, and I'm getting close. I'm getting close to that 500 mark now.
You're amazing. You're getting
When I get that 500 mark, I get a community page, which means which means I can actually tell people what I'm doing. So I'm hoping I'm going to get that soon. I only need 27 more subscribers. So you help out if you're out there and you're listening. Hey, hit that subscribe button. It would mean the world to me. And if you're just a podcast listener as well, always know that there's more content on YouTube, but I don't, wherever you're listening, I'm just glad you're listening. So thank you so much. And if you're a podcast listener, write a review and leave a rating and share as well. Those things mean the world to us. So, all right, everyone, take care. We will talk to you again real soon. Stay retro, stay safe.